Welcome to Thought to Action, presented by the Herb London Centre for Policy Research. On this programme, we discuss ideas, solutions to issues, and bringing our thoughts to action. For more on the London Centre for Policy Research, who we are and what we do, please visit londoncentre.org, our website. Follow us on the London Centre's Twitter page at the LCPR, and the London Centre's Facebook page, and other social media such as Rumble and YouTube. If you'd like to help us create more content like this, and enjoy special exclusive versions of future content, we welcome you to become part of our Patreon community at patreon.com/thoughttoaction. Also, feel free to share this video and to comment on our discussion. We welcome ideas from all sources, especially you, the viewer. We appreciate you helping us spread the word about our programs and conversations. Today on Thought to Action, we welcome David Goldman. He's a prominent economist, a well-known author-writer, perhaps most famous for his writings under the pseudonym of Spengler. And he studied music theory as well, which I suspect gives him a real understanding of patterns in international politics. He's also a senior fellow at the London Centre. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here.
You're very welcome. Today, we'd like to talk about China. Lots to say about it. You and I both know Hong Kong well and have a special affection for it, and what's gone on there is terrible. But it's the Chinese threat, and if you like, in my view, the lack of understanding from this, what a lot of our our foreign policy elites regard as this recent rise of China. Your thoughts?
Well, I wrote a book last year called China's Plan to Sino-Form the World. You will be assimilated. We're at the beginning of the so-called fourth industrial revolution, the industrial revolution driven by artificial intelligence and big data, just as the first was driven by steam, the second by electricity, the third by computers. And it promises to do absolutely amazing things. And this is the view of all of the main people involved in it. Google is deeply involved, Ericsson and Nokia, but also China's Huawei and many Chinese companies. The difference is that China has a government which is making an all-country effort to put China at the forefront, make it the leader of the fourth industrial revolution. So China definitely has a head start in terms of installing the equivalent of the railway for the fourth industrial revolution. That's 5G mobile broadband, which can carry vast amounts of data, communicates almost instantly, and of course is very fast. And there are dozens of industrial applications. Just last week, I interviewed the chief technology officer of Huawei for Asia Times, who told me that Huawei already has 5,000 private broadband networks installed in factories, ports, warehouses, and other beneficiaries of this technology, and expects to have 10 times that number a year from now. So that's definitely a big head start. And the great threat to the West, of course, is that China breaks out into this new realm of productivity ahead of us that will increase its economic power as well as its military power, and may make China the most powerful country in the world. As an American, I'd much rather have America be the most powerful country in the world.
I totally agree with that. As an imported American, I totally agree. As a legal immigrant, I am proud of America and would love to see it stay at the forefront, particularly because of the political and social system here, which allows for real freedom, something we're seeing crushed in China and its dominions.
Well, you mentioned Hong Kong. I think you and I agree that despite mine, I'm sure your great regard for Baroness Thatcher, she made a grave and tragic mistake in allowing Hong Kong and Kowloon to revert back to China in 1997, when there was no urgent or legal reason for doing so. Hong Kong is not a Chinese city, it's a British city. It was founded by British traders, Scots traders, has never been Chinese. It's simply a British city with a Chinese population. And The Chinese decided that the independence movement in Hong Kong was a threat and that they had to crush it. And they'll ultimately solve the problem, if you call it solving the problem, by changing Hong Kong's character radically. It will cease to be a British city. They will make it a Chinese city by moving people from the mainland and allowing the people who can't stand the idea of mainland domination to emigrate. So you'll have a population transfer. It will be absorbed into China, tragically, because it was a vibrant and free-wheeling and wonderful place. I worked there for a number of years as an investment banker.
Absolutely. Can I just say that I feel like it's also, I agree entirely about Baroness Thatcher's mistake. I think there was a huge series of misses on that. And in particular, it struck me that it was human capital that was particularly missed. And human capital is invaluable. It's how inventions effectively come about. And that human capital in Hong Kong proved itself. It's not the major way of looking at it, but Hong Kong had risen to become, under British leadership and British rule of law, had risen to become something like the 9th largest economy in the world. And how did that happen? It was because the Hong Kong citizens, if you like, created a brain drain out of mainland China and were innovative and businesslike in everything they did, and very, very industrious. China is in the process of destroying that now.
Yes, well, tragically, I think the Chinese believe that with Shenzhen as an entrepot of tech entrepreneurship, certainly one of the most extraordinary places in the world, they don't need Hong Kong as much, that they can combine a political system which is extremely authoritarian in terms of freedom of expression and political governance, but which also, for example, allows 100 billionaires to take part in the National People's Congress. It's a very different kind of communism than the Russians. The Russians would tell their brilliant scientists, make a discovery, you'll get a dacha and maybe the Order of Lenin. And the Chinese tell their brilliant scientists, make a discovery, you'll do an IPO in Shanghai and become a billionaire.
Yep.
So that's, whether that works or not, to what extent it works is highly debatable, but it's certainly not headed for short-term catastrophe. Absolutely. I think it's much more a matter of China having certain disadvantages in entrepreneurship and innovation because of its political system, which if we did what we're best at, would allow us to stay well ahead of them in perpetuity. But of course, if we don't do what we're best at, and we spend more time denigrating the free market and the American Republic as fossils of colonialism and misogyny and homophobia, racism, whatever we call them, the Chinese have a very good chance of getting ahead of us. It's a turtle and hare situation.
It certainly is. And the way that they've expanded over the last, as I say, in particular 20 years, so that it's only been that really in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a general high level recognition of the threat that they pose and that they are beginning to increasingly pose. The interesting part to me is how much, because they are a socialist organization, which actually means almost a hegemony led by the man that I now call Emperor Xi. One man's direction is managing to take them down some very worrying routes. Their Belt and Road Initiative is quite worrying. And here they are today celebrating 100 years since the founding of the Communist Party, Chinese Communist Party in Shanghai. I've been to the building where that happened. They regard it as a historical site and they're really excited about this. I worry how much we're going to see them move related to Xi's own personal timeline.
Well, Xi is something of a mystery to us. This is someone who comes across in Brobdingnagian giant photographs, parades and speaks in the most turgid kind of official language. On the other hand, as Edward Luttwak wrote recently in the London Review of Books, as a 15-year-old, he virtually memorized Goethe's Faust.
Yeah.
Dostoevsky. He's an interesting man about whom we know very, very little. But he's also picked some very interesting people. For example, his economic major domo is his vice premier is Liu He. Liu has a master's from Harvard University. His premier is Li Ka-ching. Li Ka-ching's favorite economist in the world is my friend Edmund Phelps, the 2006 Nobelist in economics, who wrote a famous book called Mass Flourishing, arguing that it's the innovation of ordinary people at every walk of life that really accounts for periods of great economic growth. So the people around Xi are certainly looking to some of the apostles of free market creativity in the West for elements of economic impetus. Now, whether they can integrate that into an authoritarian situation is something we in the West have grave doubts about because we've never seen it.
Indeed, I totally agree with that. The impossible seems to happen with amazing regularity from time in so many spheres and theaters. But it does seem as if it matters about Xi's motivation on things. And it is interesting to look at the people he has around him. One of the things that's strange to me is that there's no clear successor there. You got any thoughts about that?
I don't really know enough about the internal dynamics. There are a lot of leaders. I could think of Benjamin Netanyahu, Otto von Bismarck, or indeed Baroness Thatcher herself, who bestrode their party like a colossus, but left no successor of merit behind them. She might be the same thing. But I really don't know enough about it because what happens in the Chinese Communist Party is so opaque that those of us on the outside, even people on the inside, have great difficulty making sense of what's going on. She appears to be in good health and quite vigorous, unlike the President of the United States at the moment. So that's probably not an important consideration in the strategic horizon that most concerns us.
Yeah, except for the fact that he's of an age where things can come out of the blue. You have to be, how can I put it? Not having a plan of succession strikes me as a very poor way to look forward. I'm sure he does, but we don't know anything about it. I find that very telling about our whole knowledge of China and their system at the moment.
Well, the thing that concerns me the most, which we do know a great deal about because we're Westerners, is the Western response, which basically has taken three forms. One is the response of the majority of the American corporate community, which is China's growing. It's 1.4 billion people. We can and will make lots of money there, so let's dive in. So Microsoft is building new data centers in China. Apple is now more dependent on Chinese components than ever in the past. Our major financial institutions like BlackRock, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley are expanding vigorously in China because they expect that financial market to be a great source of revenue to them. So essentially we have what's the problem? Let China run the world and we'll make money. Our shareholders will be happy. The second approach is Biden, which is say we've got to compete with China. So I'm going to create all this infrastructure, but the infrastructure really means child care payments for poor people in the United States, which is an absolute joke. So leave the Biden administration response out of that. That's unworthy of further comment. Then we have the Trump approach, which is let's cut off their access to advanced technology and try to slow them down. For example, by making it impossible for Huawei, ZTE, and some other Chinese companies to buy high-end computer chips made with American technology. Now that's quite a risk because the Chinese now have an all-country effort to develop their own chip industry and compete with us. It slowed them down from what I can understand to some extent. In other words, Huawei is not able to build as many 5G installations around the world as it would like to, but it hasn't really slowed down their domestic rollout of 5G, which is the critical thing.
Right.
Well, I think that's had limited success, and it really does threaten to backfire. What I would like to see is alternative number four, which we haven't tried, which is to say, let's look at this like a moonshot, like winning the Cold War, like strategic defense. Let's undertake an all-country effort of our own to assert American technological and military supremacy and keep it forever and stay ahead of the Chinese.
And I would completely agree with that. I would support that wholeheartedly. What concerns me is, forgive me, this is my personal prejudice is leaping out. What we actually have in the US is a whole country effort to defeat climate change, something that, and we're doing it by limiting or taxing carbon emissions, carbon dioxide, which is not the major climate driver. It's a complete, as far as I'm concerned personally, it's a scam.
Yes, I personally do not believe that there's any evidence that any significant climate change is caused by human activity. In fact, during the 40s and 50s, when we had a massive increase in industrialization, we actually had a lowering of world temperature. So
absolutely. In fact, I agree with that to the stage where if you look at all the proposals being offered, if every single one was implemented, it wouldn't change the temperature of the planet. So what the heck? If you look at that compared with an all-country effort to improve technology to make access to information quicker and better for everybody, there's no competition there. We're sat effectively twiddling our thumbs while China moves forward.
well, I would agree with that completely. I think it's not so much China rising as the United States falling, which should concern us. In China and in Russia, a third of all undergraduates major in engineering. In Israel, it's about 25%, Germany, a little over 20%.
Yep.
In the United States, it's 5 to 6%. And now the engineering schools at universities are being run by diversity administrators who are more concerned with inclusion and equity than they are about math scores and SATs.
And there we move on to yet another topic that I'm sure we're both passionate about, and that of education in the US versus education in China. It is interesting that so many of the Chinese elites send their children as and when they can to American universities. We must be doing something right there, but they must be baffled by all the non-relevant, non-engineering, non-science trained stuff that goes on as a matter of compulsion at our universities.
Well, a Chinese official told me recently, now you're having your own cultural revolution. You've got public confession, you've got struggle sessions, you've got criticism and self-criticism. We did this 50 years ago, and now you're doing it. Well, sadly, I think that's true. China's education system is interesting. They've had a meritocratic bureaucracy, the so-called Mandarin system, for thousands of years. 11 million Chinese high school graduates took the university entrance exam last year, the Gaokao. They know only half of them will get university seats. So they're willing to accept a failure rate of 50%.
Yeah.
And break their hearts studying for it. And if you can look at math questions in the Gaokao on the internet, they're really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, most of our, college, university math BAs would have to study for this exam to pass it. It's really tough stuff. Now, apropos of Chinese studying in the US, last numbers we have show that 80% of our electrical engineering and computer science PhD candidates are foreign, and about 60% of those are Chinese. Over the last 20 years, we've trained up a world-class faculty for Chinese universities because most of those PhDs have gone home. There isn't work for them in the United States, not with only 5% of American undergraduates majoring in engineering. You don't need that many engineering professors. They go home, and as a result, really just in the past 10 or 15 years, the Chinese university system has come up to world standards. I'm not saying that there is necessarily better than Stanford or University of Michigan, but they compare to most American universities, and they're churning out 7 times as many STEM bachelor's degrees per year as we are. The simple weight of numbers is astonishing. 20 years ago or 15 years ago, you could say, well, these were incompetent graduates stamped out by diploma mills. Not anymore. And today, I know a lot of Chinese who say that the only kids who go to American universities are the stupid children of rich parents. These are kids who couldn't pass the university exam or get into a good Chinese school, so they've got to go to an American school. So that's beginning to fray a great deal.
I didn't know that. That's really interesting. And another, to me, worrying sign about comparison between America and China.
We did it. We invited them in, we trained them up, and we sent them home. And now they've got American educated engineering and science doctorates teaching at Chinese universities. Of course they're good. We trained them.
David, we need to wrap up, but give me something hopeful before we end this completely.
Well, the hopeful thing is the United States has always found a way of shaking off its torpor and coming back from the seeming brink when no one expected to. In my lifetime, we had Jimmy Carter talking about a national malaise in the 1970s, and 5 years later, we were already well along towards winning the Cold War and in the midst of one of our greatest economic booms in history.
Yeah.
It's happened many times, and I think that the American people are challenged to do something great. They've always responded in the past, and indeed they will again.
Thank you for that. I completely agree. I am a huge fan and have enormous faith in what I think I would call middle America. And by that, I don't just mean the flyover country. I also mean middle America, the people that really have a chance, even on the coasts. Not typically the CEOs, the grand poobahs, but the people that actually work for them, some of whom are really, really good people, right down to, you know, doormen in apartments in Manhattan, some of whom are absolute stars in the way that they act and the way that they help others. David Goldman, thank you. We must do this again. There's an awful lot more to be said. This has been the London Centre for Policy Research's Thought to Action. Thank you all for watching. Please do follow us on patreon.com/thought to action, or on our internet page at londoncentre.org, or Twitter at the LCPR, or our Facebook page, or wherever you can find us on social media. We're everywhere as far as we can be. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Please like this video if you can and spread it to your friends.